Welcome to TradingTheMBI.com. This is John. This report is for the 13th of November. A little bit of softness yesterday. We came back to the ABM yellow pretty well within reason and perfectly understandable after the swift move up post-election, some profit taking. We kind of expected that would start to take place. The speed at which Trump's cabinet is coming together and whether the lame duck Congress will do anything with budget and that, those things are all still left in the air. But cyan clearly underread on the DOC. We've had short-term buyers fade off just a little bit, but all fairly healthy. We're going to get into later the idea of how things will change from an economic standpoint as far as economy and things like that going forward, because there's going to be some dramatic shifts, and they're already starting. I mean, you can already see countries starting to make changes in relationships, who represents who, and you can see the different factions building up. And that's going to have a significant impact for companies. Now, when we look at the NQ, you can see a little bit of that fade was a little bit less than it was on the S&P. I think that's just going to be part of the rotation that you're going to have to expect to. Of course, with treasuries where they're at, yield difficult, because as much as the Fed may want to ease, you're going to see that if they change back some of these fake numbers we've been getting for reports, economy's not doing as good as it theoretically should be, which is part of the justification of why they cut 50 basis points and they're going to do another quarter. We always knew these things were in existence and that they were sort of fighting against it. You combine that with the difficulties in labor. Yeah. Turning to oil, you have a much more complicated situation, because obviously drill baby drill means oil prices will plummet. How far they'll plummet? Well, the Trump administration will set a floor on that, because they'll just start filling up the depleted petroleum reserve to be the baseline for that. But it's certainly going to mean a much stronger position, for the U.S. at least, is controlling energy, but also from a price reduction standpoint, you will have a deflationary effect in broader terms, which is something that the Fed doesn't handle very well, because they don't understand how to deal with it within a inflationary construct of the Fed. So you look at the Eurozone, a disaster situation for them, because fine, oil will be cheaper, but at the end of the day, with the tariffs and things that they charge, once you start getting into that regime, the euro is going to suffer, because they have such inefficiencies. They have tariffs coming into U.S. products that will certainly be targeted. And then you have the fact that their government construct with the VATs and everything else is highly uncompetitive as it relates to dealing with the rest of the world. So these are complications that grow. When we turn to gold, back and forth situation for gold. We've been bullish on gold overall, but you have a change now. Before, it was just inflation and more spending and a devaluation of the dollar. When you start to look at a potential deflationary situation with lower oil prices and potentially reining in some of the federal spending, it's a much weaker case for it. It doesn't mean that this is the end of it. It just means that people decided to take some gains on that, and it's a bit more competitive than you see when it comes to the crypto space, which has been exuberant about the idea of less deregulation and maybe even a supportive U.S. government to the idea of crypto in general. So that's been a boon for them, and you can see they're still going to get some profit taking within this setup, but been very exciting from the crypto space, and long overdue, according to a lot of people. ETH a little bit further behind within that setup. From an intraday standpoint, you can see the other day was pretty much selling from the open, and then by midday, once they got enough balance in between there and a push towards puts, the call buyers were able to lift things back up. We've seen positive extremes on that, all pretty much refill, and we're in a soft space here in the post-market, retesting those lows to make sure that there wasn't any additional support that wasn't noticed before. But I did mention I would get on the Skype chat that I would talk a little bit about tariffs and this idea that people think they're inflationary, and the reality is, used in the proper context, they're very effective in what they're going to do. And the goal, obviously, is bringing businesses back to America and shifting from corporate margins to actual paying for labor, which actually is a production value in and of itself. And while that may seem like contrary for some people, and they think that, well, that means prices are going to go up, Potentially in the short term, some prices may go up, but the reality is most of the things that are bought have been produced at one point or another in the US, and usually in pretty decent quality from that standpoint, versus where they've been getting them from overseas. But when you have uncompetitive practices from various countries, even the threat of the tariffs may cause them to change their approaches, allowing more U.S. goods to be sold elsewhere. Combine that with the fact that you're going to get the revenue at least straight into the government. Now, if they utilize that towards employment, training, those kinds of things, you get a productive return on that investment. And it simply becomes a question of, okay, you can make your iPhone, just as an example, not picking them in particular, you can make it in China or you can make it in the US. Yes, it's going to cost you more in the US because you're going to be paying, a regular wage, but the product essentially is going to stay the same. But if it becomes too expensive to do it over there, it makes sense to do it here. Now, can they increase price? Well, potentially in some products you can, but in a lot of them, not so much. You just have to squeeze margins. This is where you're going to see this is an interesting effect when it comes to the deflation as it starts to go with oil prices. How quickly will prices drop? Probably not so fast. Companies are going to want to maintain that margin, but whoever starts to creep a little bit lower, yeah, you're going to have to match it because that's the competition and that's the way things work. But what you do is you expand the base. Now, this is why big businesses always prefer to have large amounts of immigrants because it's great because you can keep wage pressure down. That was a problem that took place during the last Trump administration, and it's going to continue. It didn't generate inflation. What it did was it just reduced bottom lines and enforced margin squeezes. So that's a broader look at it, but we'll get into it in more detail in time. As always, though, anything relevant, I'll put on the Skype chat. Have a good one. Trade well.